In 1958, the US military launched a top-secret mission to literally block the moon's glow from Earth. Sounds insane, right? But the twisted reason behind it will shock you. Imagine this. You're lying in your backyard on a warm summer night, staring up at the moon, that soft, glowing orb that's hung in the sky for as long as humans have looked upward. It lights our night walks, guides ocean tides, and has inspired poets, scientists, and dreamers for thousands of years. Now, imagine if one morning you woke up and it was gone. Not that it vanished, but someone, somewhere, decided to block its light, to weaponize the moon's presence, to turn something peaceful into something dangerous. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. In the late 1950s, right in the heart of the Cold War, the United States government greenlit a plan so bizarre, so dangerous, and so recklessly ambitious, experts to this day still don't know what would have happened if it actually worked. They called it Project A119, but behind its name hid something even chilling: a plan to nuke the moon. And not just as a test, not as science, not even as a defense measure. This was something darker. And the real reason they planned to blow up or even black out the moon has been buried for decades. The year was 1958. The world was a powder keg. The Cold War was no longer just cold, it was turning aggressive. You had two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, locked in a technological, political, and military arms race, each determined to outshine the other by any means possible. Then came the blow that shattered American confidence: Sputnik. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. And almost overnight, the US went from global leader to cosmic underdog. What did that mean exactly? If the Soviets could put a satellite in space, they could put weapons there too. Panic swept through Pentagon hallways. It wasn't just a setback, it was an embarrassment. And to US officials, absolutely nothing could look worse than falling behind in the space race. Somewhere deep inside the military think tank, Rand Corporation, the following idea was whispered: if the Soviets are watching us, what if we gave them a show? That show would eventually be called Project A119. But informally, it had a much scarier nickname: a study of lunar research flights. A harmless name for a plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. But wait, why would anyone ever do that? Well, the official reason came wrapped in thick layers of strategy and defense theory. The Air Force hoped that by detonating a nuclear device on the surface of the moon, ideally at the Terminator line, the divide between night and day, it would produce a massive explosion, visible from Earth, a cosmic fireworks show, designed not to attack the Soviets, but to impress them. Or, in the words of the project sponsors, to demonstrate the superiority of American technology to mankind. But there was something else they weren't saying. What if they weren't planning this just for the Soviets? What if blacking out the moonlight had other consequences, ones that even scientists at the time weren't completely sure about? Because here's where things get really strange. Working on this dangerous idea were several scientists, some respected, some controversial. But among them was a young physicist. His name? Carl Sagan. Yes, that Carl Sagan, the man who would later become one of the most beloved science communicators in history. At just 23 years old, Sagan was studying planetary atmospheres at the University of Chicago when he was covertly brought into the project. His role? To model the nuclear explosion and figure out how big a flash it would create on the moon. But in later years, long after the project was buried, Sagan hinted at something worrying. They had rushed the science, and some feared that the impact could literally alter the moon's reflective surface. Imagine a permanent shadow across its face, damaging the way it reflects light back to Earth. Not only was the project playing politics, Now it was risking planetary consequences. And that's when voices inside started pushing back. But the real twist? Some believe the bomb was just a distraction, a cover story, because what came next changed everything. This part of the story often gets left out, intentionally. Why would anyone want to interfere with something as sacred and consistent as moonlight? Well, cutting-edge research from the 1950s had started showing that moonlight affects more than just moods and tides. It influences animals, marine life, even human biology. Some early military scientists proposed that, in theory, if an enemy could disrupt the moon's visibility, they might influence behaviors, confuse agricultural cycles. One paper even speculated it could delay enemy troop movements at night, in deserts, jungles, or open terrain where moonlight was critical for navigation. So Project A119 wasn't just about creating a visible bang. To some at the Pentagon, it was about testing what could happen if you turned night into true darkness, weaponizing light itself. It was a terrifying idea, but one nobody could publicly acknowledge. As the project moved forward, so did questions. What kind of bomb would be used? Could blowing up the moon even slightly alter its orbit? Was this even remotely ethical? Even within military circles, doubts began to grow. But more importantly, there was a political storm brewing. The public had no idea this was happening. Not a single mention in newspapers. No headlines, no leaks. Total silence. Because from the start, Project A119 was classified top secret. The documents wouldn't become visible until nearly 40 years later, when a journalist filed a Freedom of Information Act request in the late 1990s. And when the truth came out, people were stunned. They had no idea their own government had once considered tampering with the moon itself. But it was what the documents didn't say that was even more disturbing. Sections of the files were missing, redacted. Entire paragraphs blacked out. Why? And here's the scary part. Some believe the experiment wasn't just about a flashy blast. Others say it may have been designed to test light disruption more precisely. And then there's the theory that multiple lunar tests were considered, not just one, which begs the question, just how far were they willing to go to win the space race? By mid-1959, Project A119 was no longer just theory. Plans were accelerating, diagrams were drawn, teams mobilized, timelines drafted, and a proposed launch date was quietly penciled in for late 1959 or early 1960. That's just a decade before Neil Armstrong would even take his famous step. The idea was to send a small intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, carrying a W-25 nuclear warhead, a 1.7 kiloton device, to detonate on the lunar surface. Now, let's put that into perspective. The Hiroshima bomb was about 15 kilotons. So this would be smaller, but in space, with no atmosphere to muffle it, the flash would have been terrifyingly bright, visible from Earth, to the naked eye. That's what they were aiming for, a symbolic detonation, a power display slashing hot white light across the moon's surface to say, we're still in charge. But here's the problem. Nobody knew exactly what would happen. The moon is not Earth. It has no atmosphere, no water, but it does have an extremely fine, powdery surface, lunar regolith, which reacts unpredictably to high-energy impacts. Scientists quietly debated one horrifying possibility. Could the explosion kick up enough dust to create a semi-permanent veil covering part of the moon? That's not just darkness, that's planet-wide lunar shadow, a man-made scar visible for generations. And worse, they couldn't rule out seismic effects or moonquakes caused by the blast fracturing underground rock layers. All of this remained educated guesswork, but the date was creeping closer. Among the few scientists working under strict military clearance was a rising astrophysicist named Leonard Reifel, who had been tasked with oversight on multiple aspects of Project A119. Reifel wasn't just a technical mind. He was a thinker, a man of principles. And as he reviewed the findings, working side by side with young Carl Sagan, something didn't sit right. He later revealed in interviews, "I was alarmed, both scientifically and morally. I didn't believe the potential consequences had been fully considered." It took courage, but internally, Rifle began pushing hard on the Department of Defense. He argued the moral ramifications, he raised red flags about public reaction, and most importantly, the lack of scientific certainty. Behind closed doors, panic started to spread. Because Rifle wasn't alone. Several classified memos started circulating across high-level channels, warning that the PR fallout, if this were ever discovered, could be worse than the space race defeat itself. And so, almost overnight, momentum stalled. Without public knowledge, a military task force quietly shelved the plan. Officially, it was labeled non-viable. Unofficially, too unpredictable, too risky, too close to madness. Mission canceled. No press conference, no memo, no apologies, nothing. Project A119 was buried, and for nearly 40 decades, its very existence faded from public memory. Students learned about Sputnik, about Apollo, about the race to the stars, but the plan to nuke the moon swept under history's rug. Fast forward to the 1990s. A bold investigator digging deep through Cold War archives stumbles across vague references filed under lunar exploration programs. He makes a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request, and after months of barriers and resistance, boxes arrive. Inside are fragments, memos, badly scanned briefings, sketches, some redacted beyond legibility. But one phrase jumps out more than any other: demonstration lunar detonation. It's the missing piece. Now the public would finally know the United States military once tried to blow up the moon to win a psychological arms race. Reporters ran with it. Scientists were stunned. And people started asking questions that still, to this day, have no clear answer. While the nuclear payload was never launched, there is evidence that preparations went right to the edge. Coordinates defined on the moon's surface, launch trajectory charts, warhead containment protocols, emergency fallback planning in case of misfire. This wasn't some goofy idea on a napkin. It was almost real. Let's wander down the disturbing what if. What if they had succeeded? Could the moon's surface actually have been permanently scarred? Would astronauts in the late 60s have walked across a nuclear-blasted crater? Would lunar dust have reached Earth? Unlikely, but at the time, who really knew? And perhaps most hauntingly, would we still see moonlight the same way? Because if the explosion dimmed or distorted its reflectivity, we might have had a moon that looked bruised, partial, scarred. The stuff of dystopian poetry. Millions look up at the moon every night. Babies sleep beneath it. Farmers rely on it. Tides move to it. Entire animal species dance to its rhythm. It remained, until this moment, untouched by human violence. Every part of Earth has seen war, but not the moon. Maybe, in some small way, that sacred boundary was worth protecting. And for once, science said no to politics. When we think about history, we often remember the heroes, the achievements, the lands conquered, or the skies walked. But this part of history, the hidden parts, remind us how fragile the balance really is. How pride, fear, and competition can push even the smartest minds toward reckless decisions. A plan to blow up the moon may sound absurd today, almost like a joke, but it happened. Someone said yes to the idea. Someone ordered the designs. Someone nearly pressed that button. And this story is not just about what they almost did. It's about what we, as a species, can still choose not to do. Because the more we learn from near misses, the more we treasure what didn't happen and what it means to still have that silver satellite glowing over our heads each night. The moon is still there. No scars, no burns, no nation's flag violently stamped into its surface. Just light. Would you have stopped this plan or gone through with it? If this moved you, you know what to do.